Hi everyone, welcome to another comics loving, arts loving edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I'm delighted to be observing the musical instrument collection of artist creator Eric Drooker. Eric, thank you for joining.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jason.
Thanks for being had. Thanks for jumping in. And I will mention here at the beginning that there are a number of works of yours in the world, some of those being Flood and Blood Song, an adaptation of Allen Ginsberg, no less,
Hmm. Yes.
which is quite a feat. Lots of work for the New Yorker, and the most recent book is Naked City. And how did I do saying that, Naked City? I am an Appalachian native, so I don't want to make that sound like Nekkid, Naked
No,
City.
I like your
Great.
pronunciation, Jason. You
Thank you.
grew up where in Appalachia did you grow up?
West Virginia being one
Okay.
of those places, and I've taught in Tennessee and North Carolina.
Like the
So,
the mountain, the Blue Ridge Mountains. Wow.
absolutely.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
got I got a good friend, close musician buddy of mine, grew up there. Yeah,
yeah,
country boy, and then he came to the big city.
that's right. That's right. Well, I've visited the big city, but I've remained in the country, and there's just something about the mountains, especially, that I appreciate.
Yes, I need to spend more time in the mountains. I've spent altogether too much time in the big city.
I understand. Well, the storytelling aspects of your work, what's drawn you to be a storyteller?
I always loved stories that my parents would tell me at bedtime.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what encouraged me to start getting into the act myself was that my father, when it was his turn to say good night, he would often tell me a short bedtime story, but he would say, "This is a continuing story." This is when I maybe 4, 5 years old.
Hmm.
Let's tell a continuing story. What's a continuing story? He would start out once upon a time, and he would just make something up spontaneously off the top of his head for a few minutes. But after maybe 4 or 5 minutes, he would say, "Oh, and then we got to the edge of a cliff."
Hmm.
And he would hand it over to me.
Nice.
So it became a very natural thing from an early age. And then I learned to be spontaneous and jump right in. Oh, and,
Love
and
that.
then he fell. He slipped and fell. He was falling, but then he discovered that if he fluttered his arms really, really fast, really, really, really fast, he was able to hover a little bit. He wasn't able to fly, but he was able to hover a little enough to break his fall.
Hmm.
Got to
Hmm.
make it plausible, right?
That's
I think
right.
that's part of good storytelling is if it's too out there and if it's just too unbelievable, it's going to start to fall apart. It has to be have some of the laws of gravity and physics have to be in there somewhere, and with believable characters. So I guess these are some of the things that I learned at a tender young age of being a storyteller.
Yeah. Now you have the artistic aspect, the image. What does the image allow you to do in telling the stories that you want to tell?
That words alone couldn't tell.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
The rest of that paragraph, because you could express a lot with words. Words are really incredible technology. I got to admit, as a visual artist, someone who's been drawing pictures of animals on the walls of caves for 30, 40,000 years now,
Hmm.
I got to give credit where credit is due. This new technology we've been using just in the last 5, 10,000 years of alphabetic language and verbal communication
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
quite amazing. And it allows you to get it down in a book. Oh, and then the advent of printing, the Gutenberg, and all of this technology in these last few centuries. We're able to print it and store it right in a volume and put it right on our shelf, like a series of hard drives.
That's
In
right.
effect, a graphic novel is really just a hard drive where you're able to have all this information stored. And anytime you want to decode it, you sit down And it doesn't just pop out at you. You have to spend some time decoding it, reading it
Hmm.
page by page. Even if you're not reading the words and you're only looking at the pictures, you
Yeah.
still have to look at the pictures one at a time, page by page, and allow the story to unspool, as it were.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the words and the pictures for me come very integrated. It's possible, as we know, to tell a story or write a novel without any pictures at all.
Hmm.
Picture on the front cover if you want, but you don't even need that. You could just have a typography on the cover. You don't need any word, any pictures to tell a long story like War and Peace.
Hmm. Hmm.
But likewise, I discovered that you could also tell an entire story, several hundred pages long, without using a single word. Just telling us using a series of drawings or woodcuts, as they did back in the 1920s. There was a tradition there, just for a decade or two, of woodcut novels. It was
Hmm.
back in the era of silent movies. Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton were in their heyday. So the movies were silent and in black and white. And there was a couple of artists who were doing these woodcut novels where they were drawing with woodcuts so that they could print up multiple copies of them inexpensively. It was very democratic, as opposed to a painting where only a rich person could afford to buy the original painting. If
Hmm.
something was printed up multiple copies, it meant that virtually anyone would be able to afford it or borrow it from the library. And I was influenced by some of these woodcut novels. Again, it was as a child. I was very fortunate that my grandfather, my mother's father, from the up in the Bronx, he would visit us in Manhattan every month or two, and as a gift, he would often give books. Typically, he would give me art books, all different kind of art books.
Yeah.
And when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I remember that he gave me a couple of copies of Franz Masseriel, who is a Belgian expressionist. He's often lumped in with the German expressionists of the 20s and 30s, but he was from Belgium, so French was his native tongue, but he didn't use any French or any words at all.
Hmm.
He just used pictures, woodcuts, one page after another. It would be a woodcut, and they would, his early ones were just maybe 30, 40, 50 pages long, a 50-page book, a 50-page experiment. And he found that, hey, I'm able to actually tell a story with a beginning, middle, and an end
Yeah.
without any words, without resorting to a single syllable. And he got more expansive and more experimental. In the 1930s, he was doing these longer books that were 100, 200 pages. There weren't too many other artists doing what Masseriel did, but there were a couple of others. There was another a German artist named Otto Nuckel back in the
Mm.
30s. I think he managed to just put out one woodcut novel. It was called, what was his called now? I'm forgetting. I'll remember in a little while, but he managed to put out one book of wood engravings. And then there was an American artist who stumbled upon this work who was quite successful, named Lind Ward.
Hmm. Hmm.
In the 1930s, he did, I don't know, half a dozen woodcut novels. And the first one was published on the week of the stock market crash
Oh,
in
wow.
1929. It was just his luck. The big publication date, his book is released, and the stock market crashed. No one
Yeah.
had money. Somehow, miraculously, the book got sold extremely well, regardless, and became a bestseller for a couple of months back in 1929. And his first woodcut novel was called God's Man.
Mm.
And it was kind of an autobiographical tale about this young artist, kind of naive artist who goes off and he's he makes a Faustian bargain with who turns out to be Lucifer, but he doesn't recognize him, of course. We never recognize Lucifer is always wearing some kind of mask at the time when Mephistopheles comes knocking at the door. We think it's the Fuller Brush man or someone else, or the Jehovah's Witness, or the Tupperware woman or something like that. But he realizes by the very last pages of the story that he had in fact made this Faustian bargain where he sold his soul to the devil. And well, I don't want to give it away, but these books have been reprinted over the years. You can find them in the library. Some of them are even available. Dover has done these cheap public domain Dover editions. But those are the two I would say. Franz Massaril, who all but invented the form of woodcut novels, was a major influence on my work. But then Lind Ward, his American counterpart, who just became an American illustrator in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And yes, I remember Otto Nuckel, who did this one German expressionist novel in the 30s. It was simply called Destiny. Quite brilliant, very, very mysterious, and it's a couple of 100 pages long.
Yeah.
And I know that it's been reprinted by some, I think some graphic novel house like either Drawn and Quarterly or New York Review Comics has republished it recently. Now that there's so much fresh attention to this art form of well, what we're now calling graphic novels. That is the new terminology that we're using at the moment, because we're still embarrassed about calling them comic books.
Yes, I use the word comics liberally. Absolutely.
Some people, I have no problem with comics, but some people think that it smacks of that it's low class, or it's uneducated, or it's the thing that it's gonna your mother wants to throw your comic book collection away, or people want to burn your comic book collection. Comics are something to be ashamed of, or something that we're supposed to grow out of by the age of 12 or 13. I think that's really where it's at.
Yeah.
We're supposed to have graduated from comics by the time we're young adults, and then we're just reading the words and we're getting serious at that point.
That's right.
Right? Even the word comics implies that it's funny. There's something funny about it. Comic. It's a comic book. It's not tragic or serious. It's funny.
Or even tragicomic, for that matter.
That's right. Well, hey, Shakespeare had no problem. He would have his historical plays, his tragedies like Macbeth or Othello, and then Midsummer Night's Dream, comedy. But then he also had tragicomedies. I suppose that my latest book, Naked City, falls in that category. It's a tragicomedy more. Although we're marketing it, and the publisher we're calling it's a comedy, because there's a lot of funny moments in it. But it's a kind of a mixture. There's also some bittersweet moments and some kind of serious themes that I'm dealing with here. So I like tragicomedy.
Yeah. Well, in a Gertrude Stein sort of way, you're weaving these stories together too, of these three separate lives, and bringing them all together in one page or one set of pages. Yeah.
That's right. There's the protagonist, Isabel, who we meet on page 1, who's hitchhiking to the big city. But once the story goes on, and by the second chapter, we realize that there's actually 2 protagonists, because Isabel she's so desperate for rent money. She's having such a hard time. She thought she'd be able to support herself as a street musician. She hitchhikes to New York with her guitar, and she realizes that this might take a little while, supporting oneself on one's music. So she gets a job as an artist's model, posing in the nude for this painter, who also, in the second chapter, is really all about the painter. And he's not the she's the main protagonist, and she has, of the 5 chapters, 3 of them are devoted to her.
Hmm. Hmm.
Chapter 1, 3, and 5 are Isabel's chapters, and the painter is chapter 2, and chapter 4 are really him and his world, and he has a whole different color palette, and even the style that I draw him in is very different. He's
Hmm.
very cartoonish. He's the comic relief. He's
Yeah.
really what makes the story funny and fun to read, because he's really a caricature of a younger version of myself, or a more naive version of myself, whereas Isabel is a lot more realistic. And then there's
Yeah.
even a third character who's also an artist, but she's a dancer, Alex, who at first we think is a man. In fact, it's not clear. We never really do get it straight, because Alex does not really call himself anything. He's just Alex. The
Hmm.
other
Hmm.
characters in the story sometimes refer to Alex as a he or a she. I suppose that this is my homage to Crazy Cat
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
George Harriman, who always left you guessing, right?
Yeah.
Crazy Cat is of indeterminate gender,
Yeah. Yeah.
unlike Felix the cat, we know is a guy, right? Crazy
Hmm.
Cat, it's not exactly clear what the gender is. Sometimes it's Crazy Cat in love with Ignatz, but sometimes it's this triangle. There's Officer Pup, who's in love with Crazy.
Hmm.
I guess
Hmm.
Officer Pup thinks that Crazy is a female, and then Crazy Cat is in turn in love with Ignatz, who can't stand Crazy Cat and is always throwing bricks at Crazy Cat's head, which just makes Crazy crazier and more in love with Ignatz. So I love that. That's, I think, one of the high watermarks of all comics and sequential art is George Harriman's Crazy Cat. So that's one of the influences of Naked City is the old newspaper comics from that were in newspapers right around this time a
Hmm.
century ago.
Yeah, yeah. And I love how a little while ago you were talking about using words and images and that idea of telegraphing experiences and language being this new invention. I mean, there's nothing about a curved circle and two larger curved circles in a straight line and sort of a three-forked figure that means apple, but we just accept that it's an apple, although it's
And
really not. If you bite into it, it tastes different.
right, that's right. You bite into it, it actually tastes like, well, if you bite into a picture of an apple now, it tastes kind of like wood pulp. It
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
have that much flavor, but if you bit into it, an apple that was on the wall of a Paleolithic cave 30,000 years ago, it tasted kind of like almost like limestone
Yeah.
or granite or something. Less kind of didn't have much of a flavor, but it kind of messed up your teeth. You didn't
Yeah.
want to take a big chomp out of one back then. But that's also another theme of so much art, so much modern art, is the discrepancy between the image and the illusion, and how easy it is for us to get confused between the reality and the illusion. And
Hmm.
there's that famous surrealist painting by Rene Magritte. This is not a pipe.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that you use the form in this literary, character focused sort of way. It's a great example of what I tried to tell folks about, which is that comics is this medium that can really be used to express so very much. It's not just one particular thing or a set of movies or action figures or something like that. It's
That's
really flexible.
It's pretty unlimited, and it's true. I think cartoonists, just in the last couple of decades, we're starting to realize that, hey, this medium of comics, where we're using words and pictures, we've just barely scratched the surface of what
Yeah.
this medium is capable of. We're just kind of just getting started. It doesn't have to be fun. It could be humorous. It lends itself beautifully to comedy and slapstick comedy, but it could also be really serious. So many of the best graphic novels in these last couple of years have been these memoirs, these
Hmm.
serious graphic memoirs, long form, 400-page autobiographical stories about, well, women. That's the other surprise, that women are now some of the greatest practitioners of this
Mhm.
art form. I just read this book called Ducks by Kate Beaton,
Yeah.
a
Hmm.
Canadian artist, and it's her memoir. I don't know if she's riffing on Art Spiegelman's Mouse by calling it Ducks,
Hmm.
but it has this comedy. I mean, she has a flair. She has a lot of humor in her other books, but this one is mostly very serious and quite painful. It's this painful memoir of how she survived this job that she needed in order to pay off her college loan,
Hmm.
working up in Canada in the tar sands, kind of dangerous work in an inhospitable climate, in an even more inhospitable social climate where she was like surrounded by all these men who
Yeah.
hadn't seen it, go for months at a time without seeing a woman. And she's one of the few women working up there.
Hmm.
So she
Hmm.
gets into all of the implications of that, the economic reality of how, why she finds herself up there in these extreme conditions. Also, the dynamics between men and women, the sexual politics, all of these things are expressed extremely fluently and convincingly using these words and pictures, a sequence of images, one panel after another,
Hmm. Hmm.
all in sequence. Some people are just referring to the whole art form as sequential art. They
Yeah.
don't like comics. That's too sounds too juvenile. It's not serious enough. And graphic novel sounds too pretentious.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's taking it too seriously. So they just simply calling it sequential art, which is maybe a little more accurate after all.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there, I don't know. Maybe there is no good title that kind of covers it all. I try not to get too hung up about it.
Hmm.
Some of these memoirs, like Ducks, or more recently, uh, brilliant graphic novel called Worm. Have you seen Worm yet by Adele
Worm.
Rodriguez?
I have not. I'll have to
It's
check that
a
out.
graphic memoir. He's born and raised in Cuba, right
Mm.
outside of Havana. And it's the story of how he and his family escapes from Cuba when he was 8 years old during the Mariel boat lift. And it's all a true story. And, but it's not exactly a graphic novel, is it? Because, well, novel is a work of fiction by the
Mm.
dictionary definition. Merriam-Webster says a novel is something that, it's making up a fictional story. So a graphic novel
Mm.
isn't really accurate for something like, well, Mouse, Spiegelman rejects the term for many reasons, but he says it's not any kind of novel. It's not a work of fiction. This really happened to
Yeah.
me and my family. In fact, it's an insult to the memory of my family to imply that this is a work of fiction.
Hmm. Hmm.
And likewise, Ducks and then Worm, which I guess is also riffing on Mouse, right? The title is this one syllable, four-letter word for an animal. Like is
Hmm.
Ducks, and hot off the press is Worm, Worm. You got to check it out, Jason.
I will have to do
It's one of
that.
the great graphic novels that came out just a few months ago. Yeah, he escapes. He's living in Miami as a boy, and then he ends up going to art school in New York City, where he still lives now. In fact, when I was in New York a few weeks ago, I got together with Adele because we always liked each other's artwork. There's a
Hmm.
lot of social commentary in our work, and we had never met in person, so we met. Well, I hooked up with him in the small bar outside of Times Square. We hung out for just about an hour. We traded books. He was kind enough to write a little blurb that I used on the back cover of Naked City.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that was an honor to have one of my cartoon heroes right there in the back of my book.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you were holding up a ruler a moment ago, and as I was pouring through Naked City, I was noticing how there's this architectural geometry to so much of the landscape. And then I was just looking at the figures, looking at the characters and how rounded. So, just curious about some of those design choices for you as you were laying this book out and
Yeah,
telling this
well, that's an
story.
interesting question, Jason. I hadn't noticed that until this minute that you're pointing it out. But I suppose you're right. There's this uh, uh, contrast.
Hmm.
Probably most of the panels, which take place in the big city, after all, but the backgrounds are very geometric, like it is in a metropolis. There are these big shoe boxes, right? Some of them are
Hmm.
taller and skinnier than others, but it's a series of these big cubes and rectangles, and you'd be really hard pressed to even find a cylinder. There's hardly any cylindrical structures. There's out there. There's maybe three or four of them in all of
Yeah.
Manhattan Island. There's the Guggenheim Museum. There's
Hmm.
Frank Lloyd Wright, my favorite building in New York City, with the possible exception of the Chrysler Building, which is the most spectacular example of Art Deco architecture or Art Deco anything that anyone did back in that era, the Chrysler Building. When you finally visit, spend some time in New York, Jason, you got to spend some time. Go into the Chrysler Building, inside into one of the elevators.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
elevators, back in the 1920s is when it was open to the public. Wooden panels, like inlaid different colors of wood and mahogany and ebony wood within these Art Deco patterns.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's all these geometric patterns and recurring shapes and themes in Manhattan or any big city. Manhattan is just the island where I was born and raised. But any big city, it's this geometric landscape you find yourself in.
Hmm.
But then the characters themselves are these flesh and blood creatures. We're animals after all that we have some of us, well, like myself, I'm kind of skinny. If when I have some triangular shapes, my elbow
Hmm.
maybe, but my head is sort of round or lozenge shaped. Even my head is pretty narrow. But the point is that it's got lots of curves in it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Even the male anatomy has lots and lots of curves in it. And they really jump out at you in a composition in the city because the city does not have many curves. It's a series of right angles,
Hmm.
no
Hmm.
curves to speak of. It's
Yeah.
perpendicular lines, right angles. You don't even really see the horizon in the metropolis. It's all vertical. It's almost like someone who grew up in the Amazon rainforest. They don't know what the horizon is because they were in the jungle. All they saw were trees, vertical trees. Same thing for myself. I never saw the horizon. It was just the whole city was vertical. It
Hmm.
was an upright, portrait shaped composition. It wasn't the landscape that you would see out in Appalachia or West
Yeah.
Virginia in the rolling hill, the Blue Hills of Virginia, but it's vertical. In fact, it gets more vertical every day. There's always a building boom
Hmm. Hmm.
in New York City. They're always building higher and higher and higher and trying to outdo each other. And now that you pointed out, I think it's significant. I took it for granted, but that's maybe the constant. That's the background of the composition. If it was a
Hmm.
piece of music, that would be the bass line. That would be
Yeah.
that's regular. It doesn't really vary. It's just boom, 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 boom. And then on top of that are all the little figures, all the little humanoid figures running around to and fro, always late, always trying to drink a little more coffee so they could make it to their appointment on time. Thousands of them, little humans, almost like ants,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But they got round heads, kind of spherical heads, and rounded bottoms,
Hmm.
Some of us have more bubble butts than others,
Hmm. Hmm.
but
The middle-aged
kind
spread
of
does
yes,
happen.
there
Yeah.
there it is. It's a natural. You're going to have a natural contrast, and it's going to always have some visual interest because
Hmm.
you're always going to be contrasting these rounded or uh, organic shapes that have lots of curves in them with these geometric, almost crystalline shapes of the background environment. So it's always going to have some visual interest.
Yeah.
The artist almost can't help it if they only pay attention and learn a little bit of anatomy and learn a little bit about single point perspective and how to draw the cityscape behind them. It's almost bound to be a fascinating composition.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and, when you portray like the river, the water, there's that sort of swish. There's a little curve. There's some organic curling there. But what a great parallel to the title of the book, to Naked City, and
Mm.
what it
Mm-hmm.
means to be human, and this sort of. Sorry, I'm an English teacher. I'm reading way too much into everything. But what it means to
Yeah,
be
Jason,
human in this world.
you're being so analytical, thoughtful about it. You got to get more stupid. You got to get with the program. Did you get the election results? We're Americans. We're anti.
I know,
We're
I
we're,
know.
we're an anti-intellectual culture that we're living in, and more so every day. And get with the program. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I should. There's just too much Thoreau-like resistance. That's the deal.
Yeah. But what were you saying? Excuse me. It's true. You were just analyzing how.
Oh, just what it means to be human in this space that's divided, geometrical, but we're just not so geometrical sometimes in the
Right.
paths we take.
And it's a paradox too,
Hmm.
because all of this geometry and these crystals are all created by us.
Hmm.
So all
Hmm.
these man-made forms that are so alienating and kind of alien, and yet they're all simultaneously extremely human. They're as human as it gets.
Yeah.
They're all created. These are all products of the human imagination and human ingenuity, and then they're built by human workers who complete them. And it's mysterious. Why do we choose to make these geometric shapes when other cultures choose? There are cultures that have rounded cylindrical dwellings, kind of yurt-like dwellings, or rounded teepees. I think it's really American culture or urban culture that, for whatever reason, I'm sure economics has something to do with it, but wouldn't explain in its entirety why we're so fixated in the last century or two with cubes and
Hmm.
squares and rectangles. What is that fixation? Is it a European hang up? Is it leftover from the scientific revolution or the Renaissance, where we invented single point perspective and all that? I mean, these are all recent technologies that we all just came up with in the last few centuries.
Yeah.
But it's food for thought. Just You could go ahead and be as analytical as you want, Jason, but keep it under your hat.
That's right.
Don't let other people let on. Sometimes you got to play dumb if you want to survive. Yeah, yeah.
We will try. We will try. So
People will
some
think you're being
camouflage.
too smart. They'll think you're being they'll think you're one of these city slickers or something.
True enough. True enough. I'll have to
Miseducate. They
play
think you're
that.
trying to miseducate our children.
Oh,
You're planting all kinds of weird analytical notions in their heads.
that's right. The need to question things. Who needs that? Oh, but that's questioning too. So ah, the circle
No,
we're
no,
on.
we've got answers. There's answer. All these things we've already answered them, and we got them right here in this book, right here. Whether it's the Old Testament for you people over here, or the New
Hmm.
Testament, we answer all of your questions here. Or no, 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 we're not forgetting. No, all Muslims and Arabs, it's the Quran. All of your questions are answered right here.
Hmm.
Every culture seems to have the answers in some book, some ancient scripture. like the Tao Te Ching. I've been reading that lately,
Oh,
learning
yes.
the ancient Eastern philosophy. Hey, like everything, it's a double-edged sword. There's a lot of wisdom in all of these books. That I mean, that's why it's important, I think, for us to get a wide range of influences, and
Yeah.
to read the Quran, to read some of this ancient, to read what did the Buddha actually say.
Hmm.
It has been written down, or the I Ching. I've been reading a lot of ancient Taoism in
Yeah.
recent years, and a lot of it, I mean, it's so wise that it almost comes off like common sense.
Hmm.
But he
Hmm.
uses, beautiful Lao Tzu, who wrote it, was he uses beautiful metaphors like water, how we should all be like water. It has no ultimate form.
Yeah.
We should always be able to adapt ourselves to the situations we find ourselves in, like water does. That's and how water is so powerful that given enough time, water will be able to dissolve through stone,
Yeah.
carve through create the Grand Canyon, et cetera, et cetera. Bringing it back to this story, this recent Naked City,
Hmm.
my latest graphic novel, as we get into the later chapters, chapter 4, and we encounter the window washer, the street cleaner who goes around with a squeegee and is cleaning everybody's windows and cleaning
Hmm.
everyone's car windows, even when our windshield is perfectly clean the way it is. Thank you. He's one of these squeegee men. And I
Yeah.
always wondered, what their lives were like, because there were so many of them in Manhattan, in my old neighborhood. He ends up having a lot of wisdom. He's a bit older than the other characters, these young artists, these bohemians who are very idealistic and kind of egotistical. Let's face it, most of us artists are pretty egotistical. We think people should pay attention and listen to what we have to say and look at what we
Right.
have to draw and paint and sing about. But this squeegee character, I suppose we could simply call him Squeegee, the Squeegee Man.
Hmm.
I think in chapter 4, he refers to himself as Mr. Nobody.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's several years older, and he's had more life experiences, which has given him some wisdom. And as he starts laying down some of his philosophy, gradually, as the story unfolds towards the last chapter or two, some of his philosophy starts to sound vaguely Eastern. I think he's influenced by some of my explorations later on as I've gotten older and have read some of these scriptures, ancient scriptures of different religions, and including the Old Testament, but
Hmm.
including a lot of Buddhist texts and Zen Buddhist texts. It all goes into the mix, and of course, he's communicating it through a somewhat comic lens. It is a comedy, after all. He says, yes, once I realized that I was nothing. In being nothing, I am everything. That's
Yeah.
why you could just call me Mr. Nobody. But hey, nobody really cares. Nobody nobody will love you when you're down and out.
Hmm. Hmm.
Nobody will be your best friend.
Yeah.
So it cuts in many different directions. But he's the one who has a more kaleidoscopic, multi-layered view of things than the other characters. The visual artist, he's pretty fixated just on painting and
Hmm.
visual art and selling his paintings in the art marketplace of fine art. The singer, she's fixated on being discovered and becoming successful as a singer-songwriter and performing in these ever-growing venues. She starts as a street singer and she's performing down in the subway. And eventually, halfway through the story, in the middle of the book, she is discovered by some A&R man, a producer, kind of turns out to be one of these sleazy producers, who records her music and releases it on CD, and she's quite successful. She has the #1 hit song that summer. But I don't want to give too much of it away. And then even Alex, the street dancer, everything is about dance and movement and moving through time and space. That's the way Alex perceives reality. But this squeegee man, or Mr. Nobody, who kind of becomes the secret hero and towards the end of the story, he's able to absorb all of these different vantage points and perspectives. And from cleaning all of these windows over the years, one window after another, each window told him a different story, a story that that he'll always remember. And it's really the story of the human condition. So we realized towards the end that the window washer is the only character who really has any perspective or realistic vantage point on this human condition, and is able to understand the relationship of all of these different characters who are on a little bit of stuck in a bit of a triangle. They're in kind of one of these classic love triangles where the painter falls in love with Isabel, the singer. Meanwhile, Isabel has already fallen in love with Alex, the street dancer, who's such a free spirit that Alex can't really be tied down or make any kind of commitment. Doesn't want to. That's just not interested in making a commitment or being anyone's partner or anyone's parent, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
But Mr. Nobody, the window washer, is able to kind of see it all and have empathy for all of the different characters. And although he's really victimized, he's kind of victimized by mainstream society, he's able to even transcend that misfortune. He winds up on the street. He loses his job. He loses his lease. He winds up literally on the street, homeless, reduced to cleaning windows of cars that stop, at a red light. Before the car could speed up, he's already wiping off, spraying your windshield with a little soapy water and squeegeeing it down. Whether or not you toss him a quarter is your prerogative.
Yeah. Lots of metaphors to unpack there.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. More than I even really. I haven't even gotten too analytical yet, Jason. Well, I guess that's your job. We need a little division of labor, after all. When I was so busy just trying to get it down on the page, I had these different ideas, and I as long as it seemed like, yeah, that's cool. That's a cool idea. Or yeah, that'll be funny. That'll be really funny. I didn't bother to analyze why it would be funny or interesting or a cool idea. I just rolled with it and went along with it just because I just liked it was a story. This is what I guess many artists we try to simply, because you can never really go too far wrong if you're a writer. Don't try to write a novel that's going to be a bestseller or that's going to be something that the public likes. And the same thing goes for a visual artist or a musician. Don't try to write a hit song, the song that everyone's going to love. Write the kind of music that you want to hear. And ideally, compose the kind of music, create the kind of music that you always wanted to hear but have never really heard before. Write the novel that you've always wished someone would have written but you've never encountered yet. It's maybe going to fall on you to be the one to actually write it down or to paint this picture. No, yeah, Picasso has done that. He got abstract and got cubistic, and then it got completely abstract with Kandinsky, which was totally non-figurative, non-representational art, purely abstract. splatter painting of Jackson Pollock.
Hmm.
Yeah, but the artists, we're just getting started. We've been at this for only 30 or 40,000 years. We're just
Yeah,
getting warmed up now.
that's
So
right.
anyway, this was I kept reminding myself when the story, don't get too analytical, Eric. Just tell the story that you always wanted to read, the graphic novel that you wished was out there that you've never seen before.
Love it. Love it.
That was a big city, that was about someone who was born and raised in the big city, Manhattan. You'd think there would be more stories like that, but no, most graphic novelists, for whatever reason, seem to be a bit suburban,
Hmm. I
for
can see
better or
that.
worse. I mean, some of my favorite ones, like Chris Ware, it's this middle class guy who lives in the Midwest.
Hmm.
He's this, living in this suburban area, and he just evokes just this incredible poetry of what it's like to live in that environment, which, after all, is where most white people grew up.
Hmm.
Most people who buy books, people with money, white people, are from the suburbs. Cities are a little bit of a different animal. In cities, white people are the minority.
Hmm.
Mostly all these so-called ethnic groups, all these Asians and Latinos and Black people and Jewish people, and all these people who never quite felt safe to live in a rural area, never quite felt welcome. So we all stay in the cities. The
Yeah.
cities all vote blue through the decades.
Hmm.
Everywhere else, all the rural areas always vote red. So there's a real divide between rural and urban. So I wanted a story. I wanted to read a story about someone who's not just finds themselves in the big city as a career move, but someone who was actually born and raised there. You'd
Yeah.
think there would be more stories like that, but there's actually quite few. And then I also wanted it to be have a lot of social realism and social critique,
Hmm.
and be funny at the same time. Why not have it be a comedy? Like Charlie Chaplin was able to pull that off
Yeah.
simultaneously with a movie like Modern Times. People
Hmm.
haven't seen that recently. It bears a second viewing. It's this incredible work of social realism and social critique from the mid 1930s. The Depression, all about the economic depression and the U.S. capitalist economy and how it treats labor, and how the police start shooting people who are picketing. There's that scene where the girl's father is shot and killed by the police when he's on the strike. He's on
Hmm.
a street demonstration. So that's dead serious. But this is right in the middle of a Charlie Chaplin comedy. I
Yeah.
thought this was supposed to be funny, but Chaplin understood that comedy and tragedy are very closely related.
Hmm.
In
Hmm.
fact, there's kind of two sides of the same coin, wouldn't you say, Jason?
I would say that laughter and tears do come together.
Not to get too analytical about it, but it's almost as if they're just two different ways of viewing the same phenomena or the same experience he may have had.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
one of the formulas for comedy is simply time. It's what is it? This is George Carlin gave this as a formula for humor.
Hmm.
Tragedy plus time is comedy. Tragedy plus time equals comedy. That's
Wow.
pretty wild.
Hmm.
You start
Hmm.
thinking of examples. Yeah, at the time, it wasn't so funny when you just stubbed your toe, was it? It's pretty, you find a pretty tragic, painful situation. But if you look at it, a few days later, a few years later, you do a drawing of it. It's the funniest thing in the world. In fact, that's really what slapstick is:
Hmm. Hmm.
laughing at people slipping and falling on banana peels. It wasn't so funny while you were slipping and falling and banging your head, but it's funny now that we're making a comic strip out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, that's just one of many formulas and definitions of what comedy and humor is. A very elusive, mysterious thing, is it not?
It is. It is. And
Hard
I
to
love
really put your finger on it.
I love the motif we've had from before we were recording when we were talking about the incredible time that it takes to create a comic or graphic novel, whatever terminology, and that need to reread, revisit, give things time, because comics are definitely one of those things to go back and look at, and as you mentioned, analyze, and that is the part of the reader as well to make meaning and find those connections
Yeah.
with said author an
I
artist.
think so. I think that's when I'm enjoying the work the most. The first time, whether it's a piece of music or a movie or a piece of visual art, whether it's a single painting or a sequence, the first time I'm just sort of letting it wash over me. I'm just
Hmm.
enjoying the visual or audio sensation, just pure sensory pleasure of it. And that's a worthwhile reason right there, just the sensual pleasure of it. It's aesthetic pleasure. It's
Hmm.
worth the price of the ticket right there. But if it's any good, and it's rare that it's any good, let's face it, most movies are not very good. Most books, most comics, most things I draw were not very good. I only hang on to the ones that I really pulled it off that time. You should come over here, Jason, and take a look in my waste paper basket sometime. That's a good measure of the true artist. But then when you're looking at it again, the first time it's pure sensory pleasure. But then
Hmm.
again, you could say, whoa, whoa, what is this is really poignant. The story that's being told. I can relate to that. It's not exactly what happened in my life, but this reminds me of whatever, my father's childhood or my friend's childhood, or it
Hmm.
reminds me of that piece of history they were teaching us in high school that I thought was so irrelevant. This story is a way of really appreciating how things unfold over time and the difficulties that one family, different generations find itself in. And then if you read through it a third time and start getting gulp analytical about it, you start to
Hmm.
really appreciate the underlying structure and how delicately it was built and how there's again this underlying structure, the geometry of it, or the bass line if you're a musician, and then there's the melody on top of that. You start to analyze all of the different layers and all of the recurring patterns.
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
all art forms have patterns, right? Visual art, definitely. The music is famous for having patterns and rhythms.
Hmm.
If it didn't have rhythm, I don't know that would we even think of it as music.
It would be very difficult to dance to, although it might make excuses for some of my dancing
Yes,
at times, but still.
be open-minded about it. I suppose. Hey, try it. You got to try it. Someone's got to explore these things, and even architecture, which is an art form, has recurring patterns.
Hmm.
Whether
Hmm.
it's even in the spacing of the windows when you look up at a building, there's this recurring patterns. That's what gives it its beauty.
Yeah.
These are
Yeah.
some of the principles of aesthetics. If you ever go to some art school where they start getting really serious and getting
Hmm.
analytical about aesthetics, they talk about symmetry and balance,
Hmm.
pattern and rhythm, and these are things that all art forms share, whether it's visual or music or writing or poetry or dance or anything at all. Has all of these different underlying principles that are crying out to be broken. That's why it's important. I tell the young art students this is why it's important to learn them
Hmm.
in the first place when you're young. Try to get these principles under your belt so that you could then go out and break them. or
That's right.
discover which ones of them you could break and which ones, if you break, the thing falls apart. It's really
Yeah.
not going to make sense. Or no one else is going to want to read it or look at it or listen to it if you break too many of the rules.
Hmm.
But I
Hmm.
think this is what so much of modernism in the last century and a half has been an exploration of all of the arts. How many of these rules can we break and have it still be stimulating and still work? It still
Yeah.
works. It's still a work of art.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be realistic after all. Ever since the Renaissance, Europeans thought that a painting had to really look like or create the illusion that you were gazing out a window.
Hmm.
And the
Hmm.
frame of the canvas was really just the frame of the window sill. And you had to have perspective and it had to be realistic. Otherwise, it's not a serious painting. No one's going to give it the time of day.
Hmm.
So that's some of the early examples of modern art where violating those rules. No, I could exaggerate, I could distort the figures, I could stretch them out, I could compress them, I can make the colors completely different from what you would see reality, like that Matisse painting of the woman with the what is it? She has like a red stripe in the middle of her face, and the
Hmm.
rest of her face is green. But I think the title of the painting is like "Woman with the Red Stripe," or is it "Woman with the Green Stripe"? They started breaking all of the rules. The colors have nothing, no bearing on reality. I'm
Yeah.
distorting them. You're changing the sequence. You're changing as many things as you can, and see will it still hold together.
Yeah. 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 It creates fascinating possibilities and that moment, whereas the artist, the creator, you're rolling with it. I would also say there's that power for the reader to sometimes pause and realize why they're feeling the way they are. But some of those things are more hidden than that too, as well. There's
Mm-hmm.
that great beauty to it.
Yes, it is. It is very mysterious. I suppose I'm just thinking out loud here with you, Jason, but similarly to what we were saying 5 or 10 minutes ago about when you create a work of art, you don't want to get too analytical or self conscious. You just want to get it down on the page.
Right.
Later, you could be analytical, or let some art critic be as analytical as they want. They're getting paid to be analytical about it. But I think similarly, while you're doing it or while you're enjoying these different forms, it's probably best to not even try to figure out why they're
Hmm.
evoking these emotions. And I guess, this goes beyond even art or aesthetics. Just experience being alive. Uh,
Hmm.
uh, Throughout the day, we're triggered by this reason. Then we're feeling happy. This makes us laugh. We're having all of these different emotions. Some of them quite intense, and some of them make us laugh hysterically. A few hours later, we might be laughing out of the other side of our face,
Hmm.
right? Or
Hmm.
crying inconsolably. But even that will pass. It's always morphing into the next thing. But I don't see that there's much point while we're having these emotions trying to understand that. No, why am I feeling? Why am I laughing? Why am I? I would recommend, I'm no expert or psychologist, but first time around, just feel it. Let yourself
Yes.
feel these things to the maximum, 1,000%. Open all your senses, allow yourself to feel them to the maximum degree.
Hmm.
And then maybe later or the next day, you could reflect on them of, gee, now why did I have that extreme reaction when she said such and such? Why did I get so angry and enraged
Yeah.
at what she
Yeah.
said? Now, why did it remind me of something my mother said or whatever? However, you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to go there, but I think it's useful to not be dependent on Sigmund Freud, and he died 100 years ago anyway. But to be able to reflect and to try to understand we feel, these different emotions.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
suppose that's largely what all an artist is. It's someone who just does this professionally, who
Yeah.
feels like they have the full emotional palette out at their disposal, and they could use a little of this, a little tragedy, a little comedy. They could make it bittersweet, like a chef, adding a little salt, a little sugar.
Mhm.
You're using
Mhm.
all of these things, whether it's music, like the Beatles would be a famous example where John Lennon was almost the salty, a little abrasive, kind of a little too salty. But
Mhm.
then Paul McCartney, he was so sweet,
Right, right.
almost. And then when they broke up, you realize that when it's just Paul, it's like this saccharine, syrupy sweet much of the time. But then when it was the two of them, Lennon and McCartney, somehow had this alchemical balance where it was just the right amount of sugar and salt, but not too much, just the right balance that they found.
Mhm.
They were just for those few years. It was a very temporary arrangement, and then it blasted apart.
Yeah.
George Harrison went running over there, ran to the Far East, got all involved in Eastern mysticism. Ringo went running in that direction. He's still at it. Ringo is still playing his drums as we speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ringo, who is the oldest one of them all. I think Ringo is like 82 or 83, and he's off there now doing his recurring patterns, repetitive patterns and rhythms. So yes, I would say that artists, and not the least of which are these comic book or graphic novelists, because we're using a couple of different art forms, right? It's a hybrid. Well, like cinema, it's visual art,
Mhm.
but it also is literary, and it also has music. There's a soundtrack in movies that graphic novels don't have. We don't have
Mhm.
that, but movies are expensive. Hollywood, you need millions of dollars to make a
Mhm.
movie. One of the things that I love about being a cartoonist and doing graphic novels is if you're patient and you don't mind spending a few weeks or months or years of your life, you don't really need much money to speak of.
Mhm.
All you
Mhm.
really need is a few sheets of paper and a pencil in order to do it.
Mhm.
If you have some ink, like a ballpoint pen or a crow quill, well, that's a luxury if you want to make it pen and ink, but you don't need too much more than that. I suppose you need time
Mhm.
and space, right?
Yeah.
There's no way around that. You need to carve out enough time and space
True enough.
to complete the work. But it's visual. You have to have a working knowledge of visual art, and you have to know how to draw, at least to a certain degree. You don't even have to be that great. But I've seen some excellent comics that were little more than stick figures.
Mhm.
But in those examples, the writing or the dialogue was really, really good or really funny.
Yeah.
So I guess you could be deficient in one of the skills. Maybe you're not such a good writer and you're not so good with dialogue, but you have just a kick-ass drawing style. I mean, your knowledge of anatomy or geometry is so amazing that anyone is going to be seduced
Mhm.
for hours just by simply by looking at the visuals. A lot
Yeah.
of art, lots of comics. Even now, I don't bother to read the works of Frank Miller or Mike Mignola. I'm not
Mhm.
hurting your feelings, guys. I love your work. You're among my favorites, and I'm influenced by you. But I'm not really into the what your characters are saying or the trajectory of your stories. I just love the way you draw,
Yeah.
just the way you draw the characters, and even just the way you're breaking down the page, the composition, the abstract compositions. Even the panels that don't have figures in them are such amazing abstract compositions that I'm completely in heaven just looking at your visuals. I could just bypass the word balloons. There's enough for me to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much to appreciate, and I kept you well beyond what you promised as far as time, but I'll wrap
I
with,
still got plenty of time and space here,
oh,
Jay.
well, thank you.
Don't
I
worry
appreciate
about
that.
me. I'm always carving out a little more time and space.
Do
I've got,
you, sorry.
I say I've gotten good at it. I've gotten older. That's half the trick of being an artist is learning how to keep carving out more time and space for
Love that.
yourself. Right? You may not be able to afford a studio, but that's okay. You just carve a little corner of the room or the
Hmm.
garage or in the basement. That's carving out your space.
Hmm.
And you only need a few cubic feet, really. A cartoonist doesn't really need a whole lot of space just to set up a little surface, a little drawing table, or a little surface area. And then you've got to carve out a little space in your busy schedule. Yeah, you probably have a day job. Hang on to it. Hang on to that day job. Ignore what I said at the beginning of this conversation. Don't let go of that day job. And then when you come home in the evening or maybe on the weekends, just for a few hours, when you have a little time carved out
Hmm.
along with your space, you could start playing around. And I think it's infinitely more rewarding, more gratifying than what you would have been doing otherwise. That is social media,
Right.
spending your time on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook. Put that, that's, hey, all that social media, it's taking up your precious time and space.
That's right.
We
That
don't,
is
we
true.
don't have, we don't, we don't have very much time and space. And you don't need much. There's no excuse. Just grab a ballpoint pen from over there and grab some paper from over there from the recycling bin and draw it on the back. And if it came
Mhm.
out good, then you could scan in just the ones that you thought you pulled it off and you were pleased with. Just scan in the good ones, and then you could build from there. Those are the first opening pages of this little story that you're telling. And the story could be a 5-page strip, it could be a 10-page strip, or it could be a 200-page
Mhm.
story. You never know where it's going to lead you.
Yeah. Yeah. Any musical, we've talked a lot about music and different types of art. Any musical recommendations to pair when reading the story, when reading
Yeah.
Naked
Oh,
City?
for this particular one, let's see. That's a good question. I'm always listening to music while I'm drawing, but such a wide range of music. What would work well with this? Well, the protagonist is she is a singer songwriter after all. It's
Mhm.
a young woman. I would listen to some works by Jolie Holland, the young singer songwriter, or even Regina Spektor, Billie Holiday.
Mhm. Mhm.
Who are some other just young singer songwriters? Well, we've all heard of Taylor. What were her name? But she's in danger of getting overexposure. You already heard her for a couple of hours today. I would explore some other female vocalists.
Mhm.
I mean, even old blues singers like Ma Rainey or Bessie Smith.
Mhm.
Some
Mhm.
of the old blues singers definitely influenced the story. The hit song that Isabel, the protagonist, writes is the story called Pigeon Blues. It's all about, I wish I was a pigeon in the sky. I wish I was a pigeon in the sky. Flying through the air, I wouldn't even care. And
Mhm.
I wish I was a pigeon in the sky. It's a basic blues pattern
Yeah.
influenced by someone like Bessie Smith in the 1930s. So, yeah, explore old blues, female vocalists. And then for the rest of the story, I would say jazz, instrumental music, because
Mhm.
too many lyrics are going to just be distracting. I want you. You need to be reading the dialogue, right? So
Yeah.
listen to some instrumental works by John Coltrane
Hmm.
or Artie Shaw is a big favorite. Oh, Don Cherry, I would recommend. He was a free jazz musician. Is had its heyday back in the 70s. I knew him because he was a next door neighbor of mine on the Lower East Side. He was a trumpet player, Don Cherry. He played with John Coltrane. He played with the best of them. And he's got dozens of albums out. And it's hard to even categorize his music. Some of it is jazz, but he's very influenced by world music. It's extremely evocative. So if I would pick just one soundtrack to put it, find on Spotify,
Hmm.
Apple Music, or wherever you stream your music, look up Don Cherry, the jazz musician. There was some old white guy from the 40s, but we're not talking about him.
Hmm.
We're talking about the trumpet player, African American Don Cherry. His whole body of work would be an excellent soundtrack to this. And he's a city boy. He lived right in my same tenement building that I was living in. So he would be a kind of a natural soundtrack for Naked City.
Love it. Well, the final official question is, if I'm a listener, where can I go to connect with you to learn a little bit more? Any particular online or in-person spaces that I should know about?
Yeah, well, in addition to the books, which are in bookstores everywhere, the new hot off the press. If your bookstore doesn't carry Naked City, a graphic novel, just order it through your bookstore.
Hmm.
If you want to get a copy that's signed, where I draw a special original drawing for you, I do this with every book I send out through my website. No extra cost. Just order it through Drooker.com. It's just my last name. Drooker, Drooker.com. You could see a lot of preview pages of the book, so you could see
Hmm.
what you're even getting yourself into here. And you could also look at hundreds of examples. Many of my pictures will probably look quite familiar to you because I've done dozens of covers for the New Yorker magazine
Hmm.
over the years, and some of them, quite famous. In fact, I was on the New Yorker last week. I was on their annual money issue. Once a year, they have a
Nice.
money issue, which was kind of an ominous image of a Wall Street businessman, but you're looking up at him. So we're seeing the bottom of his sole of his shoe, which is about to step right on us. It's
Hmm.
kind of a
Hmm.
scary, but it's just funny at the same time. A worm's eye view of a Wall Street businessman. So all of these images and more can be found just on my website, Drooker.com. That's the quickest one-stop shopping. A simple Google search on my name, just Drooker, Eric
Hmm.
Drooker, you'll just see thousands of images. Some of it will look familiar from seeing it on the street because I've done a lot of street art over the years and street posters and graffiti. Some of that will probably be familiar to you if you've lived in any big city anywhere in the US or in Europe or Mexico for that matter. You'll probably recognize some of those images. So, yeah, there's no shortage of my pictures online. The internet is critical as I am of the digital era,
Hmm.
really lends itself to pictures. It's such a visual medium. I mean, you could just, at your fingertips, you could see lots of examples of what I'm trying to describe here in vain over this silent podcast where we're holding the pictures up to the microphone.
That's right. That's right. In these square little boxes where our round figures are having
Yeah,
these conversations.
but it's all good. Then this way, the listeners get to conjure their own images and use their own imaginations, and that's also a beautiful thing.